Kia ora, g'day and welcome. I am Alister Christie and this is my CodeRage XII presentation on the Delphi IDE. The Delphi IDE can be a bit of a complicated beast. It has a long history and has received many enhancements over the years. It has many extremely powerful tools which can save you considerable development time, but you need to know where they are and how to use them. Hopefully, in this video, you'll pick up some great tips that will show you how to continue to build great applications only faster. Many of the tips and shortcuts in this video I use every day and automatically without thinking. But it wasn't always the case. Initially, a conscious effort is required to repeatedly use a technique, i.e. practice, sometimes slowing you down, but eventually you start to reap the benefits. A bit about me: I live on a lifestyle block here in New Zealand, along with my wife, 4 cows, 2 sheep, 2 geese, and numerous chickens. Apologies for the rooster in the background, you can listen out for him. I've been programming in Delphi since 1999, but also used Turbo Pascal prior to that. I've presented at many of these CodeRage events, and one of my first sessions for CodeRage III was also on IDE tips and tricks. I maintain the LearnDelphi.tv website and am currently the main contributor to EmbarcaderoAcademy.com, both sites you should check out for more training videos. Anyway, let's get into some IDE tips and coding shortcuts. Let's start by going File, New, VCL Forms Application. Now, that was pretty quick to create, but if we want to create and add a data module, we go File, New, Other, and then we have to go down where data module is, and it's in Delphi files, and then we look around and there's data module, and then we go OK. If you're creating data modules quite regularly, you can actually customize and go grab data module, and maybe you want to go down to the DUnitX and add a DUnitX unit if you're doing unit testing. And now when we go File, New, we can go straight to data module. And you might want to customize this further. For instance, I hardly ever create packages, so I might remove that. And maybe you're not doing any FireMonkey, so you could remove that one. Or maybe you're only doing FireMonkey, so you could remove VCL Forms Application. So that's kind of the first tip there. The next couple of things I'd like to mention are related to fonts. If you press Ctrl numeric plus, you can increase the font size, or minus, decrease it. We go right click Properties, or you can go Tools, Options, and then go find Display. Courier New, it's an okay font, but I prefer Consoleless. I find that a bit more readable and useful. So there are a huge number of fonts. If you do a Google search for the best font for programming, you'll get a number of hits for various fonts, such as Source Code Pro, I think, is quite common, and various others. But I'm quite happy with Consoleless, and it's installed with Windows by default, so it's quite easy to find. Let's now customize our environment a little bit. If I right click up here, we can disable certain things, such as I could get rid of the Embarcadero community and browser and personality to make a little bit of extra room. So custom, which gets rid of the help. And we can go in and customize and add additional things, such as if I go into debug, I can take breakpoints and throw that in there, so I can disable breakpoints and so on. So customizing the buttons, if you've got buttons you don't use, then it's a good idea to remove them. And what you can also do is then start laying things out a little bit more efficiently. Oops. And we get if we put everything all in one row, we get a little bit of additional vertical space for the IDE, particularly with the code. The other thing I like to do is throw all of these things on one side, something like that, and give that a little bit of extra space. And juggle things around, or even you can hide various things. And if I just let's put a and compile with the warnings, I like to take that off and and throw that down the bottom there. So that's kind of more or less how I arrange the IDE. And so we've got the default layout. We can then save that and call it more code, and that way we can then go back to default or more code. Let's close those and pin those, and then we can say save that as all code. So now we basically, if you're doing like code review or something like that, you can sort of maximize the amount of code area. This is particularly useful if you're wanting two things side by side or something like that. And yeah, it just allows a bit more space, or you might increase the font size or something like that. But anyway, let's go back to our more code layout. Let's next take a look at color, and you might be able to notice that I've already been playing around. If we go into properties and then the editor options color, we'll come across to Delphi and have a look at the colors. And what we've got are the default. We can change to one of the others. I used to quite like sort of a theme like this because I was an old Turbo Pascal user, and you know, the typical sort of blue background of a sort of VGA type monitor and yellow text, quite highly contrasting and not too hard on the eyes. The default with the white background and black text is the best for readability, but it's also quite hard on the eyes if you're staring at a screen for a long time. So something a bit more subdued can be a lot nicer to use. Now you can go through and change the background color to something a little bit darker, something like, oh, okay, let's find white space, foreground color, background color. But then you've got to go through and with each thing change its color individually, which is quite painful. The better option is, and I'll need to quit Delphi, use the IDE theme editor and Tokyo, and basically pick another theme. And there's lots of options, but if we go with, say, we'll start with that one and go apply theme and then restart Delphi. Delphi 10.2 and restart that. The other thing I like to do is pin to the taskbar, so if we it'll stay there even after we close it. And we can create an application and then have a look at the source. And at this point, it's pretty close to what we might want, but not quite. So we go into our properties and color. Let's look at Delphi, and maybe we want the comments in italics. and maybe a slightly different color. And we want the line highlighting, line highlight to be something, let's go a bit less colorful and darker. So that's a bit easier to read, and you can change the symbol, for instance, except we want foreground color. Maybe go with teal, and maybe say that's a bit hard to read, so we want something a bit lighter. Symbol, shift that up there somewhere, and so on, in bold, for instance. So, and that might be slightly easier on the eyes type theme, particularly if you're programming at night. So yes, get in and change the colors. The theme editor is available from the Road to Delphi in projects, Delphi IDE theme editor, and scroll down and get the installer from there. Let's take a look at a project that has a little bit more source code in it, and we'll open this one up. Oops. Let's build it for Win32. And eventually, so this generates fractals, and we can zoom in and so on. And it gets harder and harder to calculate as we zoom in, and we can go to options. And we can see, so I wrote this as part of a talk I did for the ADUG Symposium a couple of years ago. I've got a video on YouTube on actually writing it from scratch, so it's worth taking a look at that. Let's take a look at some code. So here's sort of the basic source code for it, for the main form. Let's start by having a look at this bar here. Here we've got sort of the various uses of the application. So there's the interface, and if I go Ctrl-Shift down, it's our first keyboard shortcut, I can go to the implementation uses, and we can see there's our strutils and blah 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 blah. The next button along, we've got top and bottom of the file, which is much easier to go Control End or Control Home to do that. The interface section, and what I mostly use it for is going to the various uses, implementation, or interface and implementation. It's also got sort of initialization if you've got that, but I don't have that section. So that's sort of that. Here we've got all the classes, which have only got form 6 in the application. We could quite simply add equals just class, and we see we're now in my class or my form, and if I pick a method, and I'll use that Control-Shift down arrow again, and that will go to the implementation to it, and we can sort of swap between and scroll down to another one, and the next gives us all the methods. And if I go, let's have a look, timer 1 or just 1, so that didn't work. There we go. So I must have double clicked there and grabbed up that one. Okay, so that's cool. So this gives us a much more comprehensive search. I guess I did a double click again. There's our create for our FireMonkey color map. Anyway, so that's this toolbar here. It's worth being aware of it. If you're not using it, you might as well. I'm not sure if you can disable it, but it's quite helpful, if only to go between the various uses. So if we're continuing on with sort of code navigation type things, there's kind of the basic type things. The control right arrow goes between words, control left and right, and that's quite handy for navigating. We might look at. I've got to try finally somewhere here that should be indented a bit better. No. Oh, there we go. So let's say we want to add a begin and end around this block. And sometimes it automatically adds the end, but didn't in that case. We now want to indent all of that, and I can, we can do that one line at a time, but that's just painful. Or you can just highlight the text and press the tab key. Now, if you're on or shift tab to bring it back. Now, if you're on an older version of Delphi, control shift U for unindent and control shift I for indent. They're two key sort of. I'm old school and I tend to automatically do the control shift I and U because the tab option wasn't available previously. So that's indenting code's good. You can actually, if you wanted to indent by or unindent by a single character, if you hold down the Shift Alt, you can just select a column and delete. It allows you to do blocks of text. Like if I do the Shift Alt and grab this and go copy, and then come out here and go paste, we can see we can sort of copy and paste it in slightly different kind of fashion. Another highly important code navigation thing that I do all the time is using bookmarks, and I kind of do it automatically. And I've been working on a machine where the keystrokes aren't available, but you can toggle bookmarks by right-clicking and go to bookmarks, clear bookmarks, and so on. But to set a bookmark, use Control Shift and then a number. So set bookmark 1, and I might set bookmark 2 here, for instance. And then we go up, and then I can go back to 1 and back to 2, and so on. And doing Control Shift and the number again to remove it. And I find that, just if I'm working in a certain piece of code and I need to then go and check something somewhere else, set a bookmark, go to your checking, and then Control 1 to come back, is just really handy. So I'd recommend get into the habit of using bookmarks. They'll save you a lot of sort of navigating in the code. Some additional code navigation is holding down the Control and Alt keys and using up and down, and that allows you to scroll through the various methods in the unit. So basically next and previous method. And also if you hold down Control and Alt and scroll with the mouse wheel, it does the same thing. Another useful code navigation technique is holding down the Control key and clicking on a method name. And so it allows you to sort of scroll through or navigate through, so like hypertext, browsing the web through your code. And that can be very, very helpful in terms of finding things. So you go straight to calculate and draw, and you can also go into the VCL. On a similar type of thing, if you're on a file, you can go Control Enter, and that will navigate to that unit, which is also quite handy. Another minor thing worth noting, if you have a look at the sort of code insight, we can see that T Mandelbrot is a type, and it's defined on line 11, column 3 of the Mandelbrot unit. So if we go in to Mandelbrot and come down to line 11, column 3, there we see. So it's kind of a little bit helpful. Now here's something that I don't take anywhere near enough advantage of, is the structure view. And here we can see we've got my class and form 6, and we can have a look at the log method and or form destroy. We can see there's one variable and lots of uses. Another couple of keyboard shortcuts that I can't live without are the sort of browser back and forward buttons, or the keystrokes. What I'll do is I'll go Control Shift Enter on, let's go down to a Delphi unit FMX memo, and go into scroll box, and I'll just go Control Shift down arrow to that and navigate to, can't find T size F, but we can go, no, we can't do same value, do changed. Okay, so basically I've browsed to a whole bunch of different locations in various units. I can use the Alt left arrow to go back through all the places I've been, or Alt right arrow to go forward. So the kind of navigation, just like sort of a web browser. And you can enable those buttons, which I disabled earlier, with the browser buttons, and they do the same thing. And there's the history of where we've been in the so that's a fast navigation, and I use it all the time. In the form designer, we can obviously click on something to select it. If I hold down Shift, I can select multiple things, and in the object inspector we see they've got 4 items selected, and I can change the text property on all of them. If they've got a common property, we can change that, and that's a good way of changing things in bulk. In theory, I should be able to hold down Control and drag, but that doesn't seem to work in FireMonkey. In the VCL, it'll highlight any control that touches within the bounds. We can also select things in the structure view, and Control select, and Shift select, and so on. You can only really select things at the same level, so I can't select those 2 buttons plus the hamburger button, but I could select those 2 things. So that's kind of a number of selection shortcuts. Also in the structure view, this is the easiest way of changing the parentage of a control. So this button here, I could shift so that it's parented to the form, and I can shift it back, and if I lift it up, these are both aligned to the bottom. So if you want to adjust them, you need to just click and drag one above the other. If I want to resize a control, I can of course grab the little handles on the corners and resize, or I can hold down the Shift key and use the arrow keys to resize it. If I'm just using the up and down arrow and left and right to select controls as well. But if I want to move it, I can hold down the Control key to shift it. That's moving at 1 pixel at a time. If I hold down Control Shift, it's moving, I think it's possibly 4 pixels at a time, so it's a faster move. And that's actually a new one. I didn't realize about that one, but it's it would be quite helpful to shift things a bit faster. Often you end up having things down the bottom and you kind of, or somewhere, and you want to shift it a long way, so you're holding the control, and it's quite slow, but much faster with the control shift. Another shortcut key is Ctrl H, which is hide non-visual controls, which is also that button there. That can be quite handy to make things a bit more visible if you're wanting to shift things around. I find it annoying with version control. Often you just want to shift this out of the way, and then it's a change to the form, which doesn't actually achieve anything. And it's kind of, I kind of don't like that in the version history. But you can just hide the controls and then make the appropriate adjustments. You'll notice there's a snap to grid as well, and the dots form the grid line, or the grid. You can actually disable those in Tools Options, and we go to the Form Designer, so we can turn off the grid if we wanted to, and the snap to grid. And we could also just remove the component captions to make it a bit easier to see behind them. And even with them disabled, you can still select them. There's a timer and the open dialog in the structure view. Let's turn, Tools, Options, turn our component captions back on, because I happen to like it, and I just use the hide controls. Let's swap to a VCL application for a bit. Now, to add controls, obviously you can do it from the tool palette, but there's a new add control for some commonly used controls here. For example, I can add a panel, and to that I can add a button, and I'm going to align the button to client. Now, if I wanted to shift that panel, that's rather, if I click on it, I'm just going to grab the button, and I can only shift that basically nowhere. I could press Escape, and that selects the parent, so I've got the parent selected, and then I could use the control arrow to shift it, or the control shift for fast shifting. But one thing you can also do, I can click on the button and hold the mouse button down, and then press Escape, and you'll see we've now got the panel selected, and we can now move it. This is a shortcut I learnt reasonably recently, but it's very handy. Some other shortcuts that are recent additions to Delphi. The Quick Edit, which allows us to change the name and caption properties, probably the two most commonly things you'd want to adjust, but also alignment, so I could change the alignment to left, for example, or back to none. And also the layout. So if we went back to align client and align with margins and make that one, I don't know, 20. Another really cool thing is quick copy name. So I can copy that to the clipboard, and then I can go find that in the code, for instance. If I throw another button on the form and copy it to clipboard, and I'll just fire up, we see that's actually represented as text. So I could, and let's top 90 and 100. I'll just copy those, and we'll see that we've now got a couple of buttons. And also note that it's automatically changed the names, so that yes button was called button 2, and the no button was also called button 2, but they've become button 3 and 4. And of course, there's the view as text shortcut for that is Alt F12. Should be anyway. And you can go in and adjust whatever properties you want. So if I wanted this yes button should have been a T speed button, I can adjust it there. And view as forms, Alt F12. For some reason that's not working, but we'll go back. And we'll see that tab order doesn't exist on a speed button. We'll just ignore it. And now our yes button is a T speed button. It's not been updated in the form yet, so button 2 is still a T button. But if we compile it or save it, it's going to say button 3 should be a T speed button, but instead it's a button. Let's correct it, yes, and it's all good. And it's now a T speed button. Let's have a look at the tool palette here. If I right click on it, I can go view, and we can disable some things. So if you notice the BIDI mode there, locale and localizable, so the BIDI mode is gone, and we see that there are 4 hidden controls there. We can arrange by name or category, and miscellaneous, and we could, those are the various categories there, but I prefer it all by name. You can go into properties and adjust various things, or if I show, get rid of the quick action panel, which is the same things here. So if we look at the quick action panel, we see we've got quick edit, quick glyph, and so on, the same here. So I generally not want that visible, just to give me a little bit of extra height in the object inspector, and probably also don't really need the status bar. But yeah, you can get carried away and change all the colors and what have you if you want. If I wanted to find the name of the control, I could press tab and go name and press tab again. Although these days the new search is quite handy. Just be aware that, for instance, in constraints, it's only searching the main list, so I have to go into constraints and then find max width if I was looking there. But anyway, let's now look at some code editing shortcuts. Let's start by adding a function called build SQL, and it's a string. Rather than manually type that again, I'm just pressing ctrl+shift+C, which is class completion, and that automatically adds our implementation. I can press Control space and I can override something. So if I want to override adjust size, for instance, and then I can press Ctrl+shift+C to create that automatically. If I have an interface, ifooable, I can press Ctrl+shift+G, yes, and that automatically creates a GUID for me. And if I make this, and I come and press Control space, we see that that procedure foo there. And again, I can press Ctrl+shift+C. I'll add a procedure bar, and then go, whoops, that needs to take a string as a parameter, and I could go and copy and paste that up to here, or I could hold down Control Shift Alt and press P, and that will automatically change the definition, and it works both ways. So if I add a point there, I can press Control Shift P, and there we have our method updated. Now we have this build SQL function, and let's just copy some random SQL I found on the internet, and we want to paste that and somehow have it return that SQL as a string. Now we could do this a number of ways. So there's a control space for class completion. Stringless dot create, and we want to free it. Technically we'd want to do that in the try finally, but we won't worry about that. Now I could manually go space s dot add and then do a bunch of copy and paste sl dot add and sort of copy and paste that to each line and so on. That's kind of painful. Let's take that back. What I could do is I could start by recording a macro. Down arrow and stop it, and then play back, and then just adjust my quotes here. So I'll just undo that. Another option, and I'll just copy this back to the clipboard, is multi-paste, and multi-paste is quite awesome. So I've already done this. So I've added sl.add and a quote and terminate it, and we'll see that we're escaping the quotes, and we can see it's double quoted there. So I can turn that on and off, and there we have it. And I'll just indent that with tab, or you can use Control Shift U and I, tab and Shift tab to indent. Let's take a look at some comment shortcuts. The first one is Control Shift T, which is add to item, and I've already typed this in previously. So add towns as a parameter. It's owner is me, and category SQL adjustment, or something like that. And then we can go view and tool windows, to-do list. We can see that we've got add towns as a parameter, and we can tick and it becomes done. If I want to comment out a line, I can press Control / and it will comment the line and go to the next line, and it'll also undo it. If I want to comment a block of code, I can right click and go surround, and I can add either of these two sort of the commenting styles. In addition, let's say we want to put this into a try finally, I could select that and go surround and check a try F block, and I don't know why let's just adjust the indentation. Oops. And that's now in a try finally block. Another great editing tool is Sync Edit. If I highlight the text I want to modify and I can either click on this button here or use the shortcut, which is Ctrl-Shift-J, as you probably saw. If we wanted to rename this string list SL to SQL, we can do that quite easily, and change other things as well fairly readily. So that's a quick way of renaming something. And if we go back to what it was originally, the other thing we could have done is done Ctrl-R and changed SL to SQL, and perhaps turn off prompt on replace and do it that way. So that's also pretty quick. And rather than doing the entire file, it's just doing the selected text. And while we're on the subject of renaming, let's not put that there. That looks a bit better. So on the subject of renaming, if we wanted to rename this back to SL, there is a refactoring rename which we can do the shortcut, which is Ctrl-Shift-E, and rename it back to SL. We can view the references. I'll turn that on for now, and we can see what it's about to do. We can then run that, and if we decided that was not appropriate, we can actually reverse it. Rename is quite powerful. You can use it just about anywhere. So we could rename this S to caption, and let's perform that. Bar, say rename a method to or whatever that method happens to do. We could rename our form T foo form, and also if we have a look at this one, we see that it's updated our DPR file and also updated the name property in our object inspector. So that one's quite powerful, and it can be quite good to be able to rename things in that way. You do that with events and stuff as well. So we could rename, no we couldn't, because it does a save first. But we could have renamed the event whatever we wanted. So the other refactoring I use quite a lot is extract method, which is Ctrl-Shift-M, and we can call this build SQL body. This is really arbitrary refactoring. It's not really appropriate at all, but it sort of gives you an idea how simple taking a complicated method and decomposing it into smaller methods. It can be quite quick and easy, and so on. And so we see that it's worked out that we need the SQL added as a parameter, and hasn't got our indent right, but that's not too bad. And so it's updating our TSQL object, and it'll do other parameters as well. I've seen it go wrong in previous versions of Delphi where it's missed out parameters and done weird things, but in recent versions of Delphi it's been pretty stable. We've got just enough time left to do a little bit of debugging, and I'm going to throw a button on the form and do a show message of our SQL that we generate, and throw a breakpoint in there. I did a control drag there. If you just drag something, it shifts it, but if I control drag, it copies it, which is quite a nice way. It doesn't affect the clipboard, so if you've got something in the clipboard you want to preserve, then doing a control drag to sort of do a copy and paste is quite handy. But anyway, let's give this a whirl. Normally I would press F9 to run, but F9 is a shortcut in Camtasia, so I'm just going to press the run button on the toolbar, and we hit our breakpoint, and we can do the usual debugger things, step over and step into and so on. We can have a look at the contents of the string list, and there's this new tool called visualizers, which enable us to see the actual contents of the file, or of the strings value. So there's this t-strings visualizer, so it can be used in anywhere there's a t-strings, and there's other visualizers for date times and things like that. So that's just where that magnifying glass is visible. I could also throw that in the watch list, have a look at the SQL.text, and if we wanted to preserve a copy of that, we could go evaluate modify and copy this and paste it directly into Delphi. But if you wanted to use it elsewhere, or if it was really huge, and all sorts of number of complications, we're about to lose it when we hit that free there, lost forever potentially. So we can do a little bit of hack and go save to file and specify a file name. Now what you do need to do is allow side effects and function calls so that this method will actually get called. So if I now step over and get as far as the free, we can see that there is our SQL preserved forever in a text file. Now I've done this with XML files on TXML document and all sorts of things like that. It's a really useful hack to be able to do that in the debugger. It's pretty much misusing the watch list, but you can execute any methods, or almost any methods, and cause all sorts of side effects in your application that might be undesirable, but you can, it's good for doing hacks. So remove that, and if you run it, the other thing to be aware is I think I can copy and paste that to the clipboard as well. So so there's the content of the message box. So that's another useful thing. And I think that's going to take us to the end of this presentation on IDE tips and tricks. Thanks for watching. I'm Alister Christie, and remember to check out learndelphi.tv.